Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to share and subscribe the channel. I woke up in an alien lab, and their queen just declared me her mate. Welcome to the world of science fiction. Comment below, where in the world are you watching from today? And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. A sharp, metallic scent filled Ryan Carter's nostrils as he stirred awake, his head pounding as if he had taken a hammer to the skull. His body felt unnaturally heavy, and the pressure against his wrists and ankles confirmed what his groggy mind couldn't yet process. He was strapped down. The cold touch of steel against his back sent a chill rippling through him, and as his vision adjusted, the sterile blue glow of overhead lights sharpened into focus. He wasn't in his ship, he wasn't anywhere human. He sucked in a breath, trying to move, but his restraints refused to budge. Panic clawed at the edges of his mind, yet years of surviving in the void had trained him to think before fear took over. His eyes darted around, scanning the room. Everything about the place screamed alien. The walls weren't metal, at least not any kind he recognized. They pulsed faintly, almost organic, as if the ship itself were breathing. Strange, floating instruments hovered in midair, shifting and twisting like they were alive, responding to his movement. The air was thin and artificial, carrying a faintly sweet scent that didn't belong to any station or planet he had ever set foot on. The last thing he remembered was being on a routine supply run near the outer colonies when a distressed beacon drew him in, a classic setup for an ambush, and yet he had answered anyway, a mistake he might not walk away from. His breathing steadied, forcing his mind into focus. He'd been captured, but by whom and, more importantly, for what purpose? A shadow shifted at the edge of his vision, and he turned his head just as a figure emerged from the dimly lit entryway. The moment he saw her, his breath hitched in his throat. She was unlike anything he had ever seen, and in all his years navigating the stars, he had seen a lot. Her skin gleamed like liquid silver, catching the sterile light and reflecting it in a way that made her appear otherworldly, ethereal. Her 6 eyes, a mesmerizing shade of emerald green, studied him with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. Her features were sharp, symmetrical, and regal, sending a clear message: this was someone powerful, someone used to command. Draped in intricate fabric woven with symbols that his brain couldn't yet decipher, she moved with slow, deliberate grace, her long, ornate tail curling behind her in an almost hypnotic manner. Ryan stiffened as she approached, instinct screaming at him to prepare for the worst. He had no idea what species she belonged to, but if they had taken the trouble to capture him, they weren't planning on letting him go. He kept his expression unreadable, masking the flicker of unease racing beneath his skin. "You are awake," she said in a smooth, deliberate tone, though there was something heavier, an expectation, beneath her words. Ryan swallowed down the biting remark that almost slipped free. Pissing off his captor wasn't going to get him anywhere. Instead, he took a slow breath and pushed down the rising frustration burning in his chest. "Yeah, I figured that part out," he muttered, testing the restraints again. "No. Give," he added. They weren't taking any chances. "Now, mind telling me where the hell I am?" Her gaze didn't waver. "You are aboard the Star Imperial vessel, within the heart of the royal capital," she replied, tilting her head slightly as if observing his reaction and waiting for something. "You were not harmed." Ryan let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Yeah, and I should be grateful for that," he said, though his patience was running thin. "Why am I here, for the first time?" His expression shifted as something unreadable flickered across her features. "You have been selected," she stated. The words hung between them, sharp and weighted, yet they made no damn sense. Ryan narrowed his eyes, jaw clenching in disbelief at the notion of being selected for what, exactly. Before she could answer, a new presence entered the room. Another Starks, this one older and dressed in robes even more ornate than hers, regarded Ryan with a mixture of intrigue and scrutiny before speaking in the same calm, measured tone: "You are the perfect genetic match." Ryan's pulse kicked up. He had heard some wild things in his time, but that was new. The perfect match for what? The Queen. Because that was the only explanation his mind could fathom. The older Starks, clearly some kind of advisor, nodded as if this were the most logical thing in the universe. Your genetic composition has been analyzed and confirmed. Among all species examined, you alone possess the necessary compatibility to sustain and strengthen the royal lineage, he explained. Ryan's stomach twisted. This was insane. He had been abducted, strapped down, and now they were telling him he was supposed to be some kind of breeding partner. Yeah, I'm going to have to decline that offer, he said, pulling at his restraints harder this time. Not exactly my idea of a dream job. The Queen's expression remained unreadable, but something shifted in the room, an unspoken tension thickened the air. This is not a request, she said, her voice still calm yet carrying an undeniable weight. The survival of my people depends on it. Ryan locked eyes with her, searching for any hint of weakness or escape. Then I guess your people are screwed, because I'm not interested. For a long moment, she didn't respond. Then, to his surprise, she exhaled slowly, as if she had expected his reaction. I did not anticipate compliance, she admitted, her tail curling behind her. But I will not force what cannot be given willingly. Ryan didn't trust that for a second. He had been around enough power plays to know that if she wasn't going to force him, she was going to find another way to break him. He needed to figure out how to get out of this, and fast. The Queen studied him a moment longer before turning to the advisor. Release him from the restraints. Ensure he is treated as a guest. The advisor hesitated. My Queen, I have made my decision, albeit reluctantly. The restraints unlocked with a soft hiss, and Ryan barely waited for them to fully disengage before sitting up and rubbing his sore wrists. He was free, but he knew better than to assume that meant he was safe, as he met the Queen's gaze again. One thing became painfully clear, this was just the beginning, and whatever game she was playing, he had just become a key piece on the board. Ryan rolled his shoulders the moment the restraints released fully, forcing himself to remain steady even as every instinct screamed at him to fight his way out. He had been in tight spots before, but this was a whole new level of trouble. Being stranded on some backwater colony with raiders breathing down his neck was one thing, being trapped in the heart of an alien empire that thought he was some kind of royal breeding stock was something else entirely. His mind raced with possible escape routes, but nothing looked promising. He was on a massive ship, probably light years away from any known system, and even if he somehow got off this floating palace, where the hell would he go? There were no allies here, no familiar faces, just a coldly calculating queen and an empire that had already decided his fate. The guards in the room shifted, clearly uneasy with the Queen's command, but none dared question her. That told him a lot. She had absolute authority, yet it wasn't unquestioned. There were limits to her power, and he needed to find them fast. The moment he was fully upright, he took stock of the situation. The Queen, Aine, as they called her, stood watching him with a patience that was almost unnerving. The advisor at her side still looked as though he were tasting something sour, clearly disapproving of the entire situation. Ryan had no idea what kind of internal politics were at play, but he knew one thing: he wasn't about to roll over and accept whatever fate they had planned for him. Aine finally spoke, her voice measured yet laden with expectation. You will be taken to your quarters. You are not a prisoner, but you are not free to leave the palace. With a slight gesture, a pair of guards stepped forward, however, they did not move to restrain him. That was interesting, they were giving him the illusion of freedom, trying to make him feel as though he had a choice in all this. Smart, manipulative, he hated how well it was working. Ryan exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair. Right, because kidnapping someone and telling them they're supposed to be a royal baby maker really screams hospitality, he muttered. He expected a reaction, a sign of offense, but Aine remained composed. Either she had nerves of steel, or she had expected his defiance. And what happens if I refuse to play along? You just going to keep me locked up until I change my mind? Aine tilted her head slightly, her 6 emerald eyes narrowing just enough to show she was choosing her words carefully. I do not intend to force what cannot be given, but the reality of your position remains. You are more than a guest, you are a necessity. She stepped closer, her gaze locking onto his with an intensity that made his skin prickle. You misunderstand. If you think this is only about bloodlines, your presence here shifts more than you realize. Ryan held her stare, refusing to be the first to look away. He had dealt with powerful people before, but none quite like her. There was something beneath the surface of her words, something unspoken and heavy. He wasn't sure if she was warning him or testing him, but he wasn't about to let her control the conversation. Yeah, well, forgive me if I'm not thrilled about being turned into a political pawn, he said, a ghost of a smile flickering across his face before vanishing. Before he could press her further, a guard stepped in, motioning for him to follow. He hesitated, debating whether or not to make a run for it, but quickly dismissed the idea. Even if he managed to get past them, where would he go? For now, he had to play along, gather information, and wait for the right opportunity. He had survived worse, he could survive this. The halls of the palace were as alien as everything else about this place. The architecture was sleek, curved, and impossibly vast, with ceilings so high they felt more like open skies than enclosed spaces. Strange symbols adorned the walls, pooling with faint energy as if the ship itself were alive. Stark's nobles moved through the corridors, silver-skinned figures in glowing garments that made them appear mythic. Some watched him with curiosity, others with clear disdain. He didn't need to understand their language to know that not everyone approved of his presence, and that could be either a problem or an advantage, depending on how he played it. Eventually, they reached his quarters, and Ryan braced himself for a cell. Instead, the door slid open to reveal something that looked more like a luxury suite than a prison. A massive chamber stretched out before him, furnished with intricate pieces that seemed to shift subtly, as if adjusting to an unseen command. Tall, open archways lined the walls, overlooking a sprawling alien skyline, floating platforms, shimmering towers, and a vast sea of stars beyond. It was beautiful in an almost unsettling way. This wasn't just some military vessel, it was a throne in the heart of an empire. One of the guards stepped forward, speaking in a clipped, formal tone. Food and clothing have been prepared. You will remain here unless summoned. Ryan arched an eyebrow. And for what exactly? The guard didn't answer, merely inclining his head before stepping back. The doors slid shut behind them, and Ryan exhaled, rolling his shoulders as he surveyed his new home. He wasn't naive enough to believe he wasn't being watched. There were no visible cameras, but he could feel unseen eyes studying him, waiting. He needed to figure out what they truly wanted from him, not just the nonsense about genetics, but something more. The first thing he did was check the exits. The main door was locked, which was no surprise. The archways led to an open balcony, but there was no visible way down. He was high up, probably near the top of the palace. Jumping was out of the question unless he suddenly developed the ability to fly. Running a hand along the walls in search of hidden panels, he found nothing obvious. With a sigh, he turned back to the center of the room where a table had been set with food. The dishes were unfamiliar, but he could smell the rich spices and the subtle tang of something citrusy. His stomach growled, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since, hell, he didn't even know how long he'd been unconscious. He wasn't stupid. The food could be drugged or laced with something to make him more compliant, but if they had intended to sedate him, they could have done it already. He sat down, picking up one of the strange fruits, testing its weight before taking a cautious bite. It was sweet with an odd, but pleasant, aftertaste. He ate slowly, forcing himself to think rather than letting exhaustion take over. He had time, he wasn't in immediate danger, not yet, but that could change fast. As he finished eating, the door suddenly hissed open again, and he tensed. Ain stepped inside alone this time, her presence filling the room with quiet authority. She studied him for a moment before speaking. You do not trust me. Ryan leaned back, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. You abduct me, strap me to a table, and then tell me I'm supposed to be your mate. What gave it away? She didn't react, simply regarding him with those unreadable emerald eyes. Then I will ask you a question, human, if I were to offer you a way out, true freedom, what would you be willing to trade for it? Ryan narrowed his eyes, every muscle going still. There it was, the real game, and whatever answer he gave her, he knew it was about to change everything. He leaned forward slightly, his instincts on high alert as he studied Ain's expression. That question wasn't idle. Every negotiation he'd ever been in, whether it was bartering for supplies or talking his way out of a hostile situation, had taught him one thing: when someone in power offers you a deal, it's never free. She stood poised, waiting for his response, her 6 emerald eyes calm and unreadable. Yet something in her tone told him she wasn't merely testing him. There was a weight behind this moment, a shift in whatever game they were playing, and he couldn't afford to misstep. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair to buy himself a few extra seconds. Freedom, huh? His voice was casual, but his mind raced. That's a hell of an offer coming from the person who put me in a cage. Her tail curled slightly behind her, the metal rings adorning it catching the low light of the room. She didn't so much as flinch at his words, yet there was something else, a flicker behind her composed mask that wasn't quite irritation, nor amusement. You misunderstand, she finally said, your presence here was not meant as punishment, nor was it an accident. Ryan let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. Yeah, well, see, that's where we're going to have to disagree. You had me drugged, strapped to a table, and declared me the universe's luckiest genetic lottery winner. I didn't exactly volunteer for this. He watched her carefully, seeking any sign of reaction, but she remained steady and unreadable. That unnerved him more than he wanted to admit. He was good at reading people, at picking apart their intentions, but Ain was a different puzzle entirely. She stepped closer, and despite himself, Ryan didn't move. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing him shift, he wouldn't let her think for even a second that she had the upper hand. As she drew near, he became acutely aware of just how alien she truly was, not just her skin or her eyes, but the way she moved, deliberate and controlled, as if every step were a calculation. What do you think freedom means, Ryan Carter? She asked. He frowned, knowing that being locked up in this floating palace, used as some kind of, he cut himself off. Exhaling sharply, he said, freedom means having a choice. Ain regarded him for a long moment before speaking again. Then make one that throws you off. Her unexpected pause was a revelation. She wasn't infallible, wasn't as invincible as she projected. I expect you to choose, she said finally, fully aware of what he was refusing. Ryan exhaled sharply, his hand over his jaw. Everything in him screamed that this was a trap, that there had to be a catch, but at the same time, he didn't have a better option, if she were telling the truth, and that was a big if. Then he had a chance to gather information and understand the landscape before making his next move. 3 days wasn't much, but it was something. He looked back at her, holding her gaze, feeling that same charged energy crackling between them. Fine, he said after a long moment, 3 days, but after that, I walk. Ain inclined her head, satisfaction flickering across her expression. Very well. The moment stretched between them, something unspoken lingering in the air. Then, with the same smooth grace, she turned and exited, leaving Ryan standing there with a gut feeling that he had just stepped onto a board far bigger than he realized. The next morning, Ryan was summoned before the High Council. He expected hostility, but the sheer weight of the scrutiny that greeted him when he entered the vast council chamber still took him off guard. Built of dark, smooth stone that shimmered faintly under the blue glow of suspended orbs overhead, the chamber exuded an imposing air. Ain sat at the head of a long, curved table, her expression unreadable as she observed the proceedings. Council members, a mixture of nobles, advisors, and military officials, were already waiting, their eyes sharp and unwelcoming toward the human. A tall, silver-skinned man seated closest to Ain spoke. His attire was more militarized than the others, with a thick sash of deep violet draped over one shoulder, marking him as someone of high rank. You have been given more consideration than you deserve, he said. Ryan noted the way Ane's gaze flicked to the man, though she said nothing, which was interesting. Yeah, well, forgive me if I don't exactly feel honored, Ryan muttered. A murmur rippled through the chamber, a mix of disapproval and curiosity. Some military nobles' eyes darkened, but Ane finally spoke before the tension could escalate. Ryan Carter has agreed to remain for 3 days to better understand his position, she declared. And then what? Another noble, a female with dark silver skin and a cascade of metallic jewelry woven into her long braids, scoffed. He refuses, and we are left without a solution to our genetic crisis. Ryan frowned. Genetic crisis? That was new information. Ane had mentioned compatibility, but she hadn't elaborated. He glanced at her, but she offered no reaction. I do not need to remind the council that the survival of our lineage is paramount, Ane continued, her voice smooth yet firm. But neither will I force a choice that cannot be accepted willingly. A male noble, the military officer, let out a sharp breath. This is folly. We should take what we need. Ryan tensed as Ane's gaze flicked to the man. For the first time, a trace of warning entered her voice. We are not tyrants. Her words held a dangerous weight, silencing further protest. Ryan had heard enough. He might not yet know the full picture, but one thing was clear, he stood in the middle of a political war, and whether he liked it or not, he was now a piece on their chessboard, and he was running out of time to figure out how to play it. Ryan sat back, arms crossed, his eyes scanning the gathered council as murmurs filled the room. Their gazes pressed upon him like a physical force, yet he refused to let it rattle him. He had been in tight situations before, outnumbered, outgunned, staring down the barrel of mercenaries' rifles, but this wasn't a fight he could punch or shoot his way out of. It was politics layered with expectation and the unsettling knowledge that everyone in this room wanted something from him. Ane allowed the tension to simmer, her gaze never leaving his. The council wasn't merely discussing him as a diplomatic asset, they were debating his very ownership, as if he were a rare commodity to be bartered and negotiated. The military noble, who had practically suggested taking what was needed by force, hadn't even tried to hide his disdain, that was the real danger. Some of these people didn't care about negotiations or free will, if they decided he was too much trouble, they'd find a way to cut him out of the equation altogether. Before they moved on, Ryan spoke, his voice steady as he leaned forward and fixed his gaze on the military officer. Since we're all being open about things here, why don't you explain exactly why my genetics are so special? You keep talking about survival, about me being the perfect match, but no one's given me a straight answer. He let his words hang in the air, challenging them. I don't make decisions blindly, and I sure as hell don't sign up for something I don't understand. The officer, whose name Ryan believed was Vios, stiffened his lips into a thin line as if he disliked being questioned. You do not need to understand, you only need to obey. Ryan smirked and shook his head. Yeah, well, that's not really my style. Another murmur ran through the room, council members exchanged unreadable glances. Ane did not intervene, letting the exchange play out. The Stark's lineage is failing, declared a female noble with metallic braids, her voice sharp and assessing. Our bloodline has weakened. Traditional methods of ensuring genetic stability have proven insufficient without intervention, otherwise, our empire will fracture. Ryan frowned. That sounds less like a political problem and more like a biological one. You're telling me your people are dying out? Ane finally spoke, her voice controlled but with an edge. Not dying, but deteriorating. We have reached the limits of our genetic structure. Without new viable integration, our future is uncertain. Ryan exhaled, processing the revelation. He wasn't a scientist, but he understood enough to get the implication. The Starks had bred within their own line for too long, and now their biology was breaking down. They needed fresh blood, and somehow, out of every species in the universe, his was the answer. That answer raised more questions than it solved. Let's say I buy that, Ryan said, keeping his tone neutral. What makes me so special? Humans aren't exactly known for having magic genes. The advisor, standing near Ain, Ryan recalled his name might be Riven, adjusted his robes and stepped forward with the patience of someone explaining something to a child. Your species and ours share a distant ancestral link. It is not common knowledge, nor is it widely accepted among our people, but our research confirms it. You are not the first human brought here for evaluation, but you are the first to meet the necessary criteria for royal compatibility. Ryan stared at him, trying to decide whether he was more disturbed by the fact that humans and Starks apparently shared a lost genetic history, or by the casual way they admitted to abducting people for experiments. So you've been snatching humans for how long exactly? He scoffed. Viosa's expression darkened. That is not your concern. Ryan countered, I think it is, if you expect me to consider anything you're offering. I need to know exactly what I'm walking into. Ain tilted her head slightly, observing him. Then you shall have your answers. The tension in the room shifted, the council members didn't look thrilled, but none challenged her decision. That told him two things: 1, Ain's authority wasn't absolute, and 2, she was deliberately choosing to give him information that they probably didn't want him to have. She rose from her seat with the controlled grace she always carried, and Ryan felt the shift in the air as the council regarded her movement as a silent command. This discussion is concluded for now, she said, her tone brooking no argument. Ryan Carter will be granted access to the Royal Archives under my supervision. Vios stiffened. My queen, my decision is final, he cut in smoothly, his voice as tempered as steel. Ryan fought the urge to smirk. He didn't trust Ain yet, but at least she seemed willing to give him something. The council dispersed, though not without lingering looks of displeasure. Vios was the last to leave, his gaze lingering dangerously on Ryan for a moment too long. Something dangerous simmered beneath that cold expression. Once alone, Ain exhaled and turned to face him fully. You have a talent for making enemies, she remarked. Ryan huffed a quiet laugh. Yeah, it's a gift. She studied him for a moment before gesturing for him to follow. Come. You want the truth? I will show you. Ryan hesitated, then nodded and fell into step beside her. As they left the council chamber, the palace stretched out before them, vast corridors lined with shimmering panels that flickered with information. The structure was not just a ship, it was alive, pulsing with an energy that hummed beneath Ryan's skin. Whatever technology the Starks possessed, it was centuries ahead of anything humanity had developed. Ain led him through a set of sealed doors into a chamber that felt older than the rest of the palace. The moment they stepped inside, the air grew thicker, charged with something ancient. The walls were lined with crystalline structures, each glowing with fragments of stored data. This, Ain said as she stepped forward, is the true history of our people. Ryan's pulse quickened as the crystals flickered to life, displaying images and recordings before him. The first thing he saw made his breath hitch. Humans, not just recent ones, but ancient ones, recorded the same way the stars were, as if they had once been part of the same civilization. Ain turned to face him, her expression unreadable. Now, you understand. Ryan clenched his jaw. I don't understand, not yet, he admitted, but he had the sinking feeling that whatever was unfolding was bigger than just him, bigger than Ain, and bigger than the entire empire. If he wasn't careful, he was about to get caught in something far beyond his control. His stomach coiled as the holographic images played out, ancient records in a mesmerizing, quiet display. The humans he saw were not random figures plucked from history, they were entwined with the Starks beside them, speaking with them, living among them as equals. Some wore ceremonial robes, while others appeared engaged in technological endeavors. It wasn't just some vague genetic connection, humans and Starks had coexisted once. And for some reason, that fact had been buried. Ryan glanced at Ain, who stood composed by his side. He wasn't sure if he expected an explanation, an apology, or an acknowledgement that this was too huge a revelation to drop on him casually. But she only watched, waiting to see his reaction. Exhaling sharply, Ryan said, you're telling me humanity was part of this empire? That we didn't just show up in the stars one day and start stumbling around like idiots, but had a place? Ain inclined her head slightly, her silver skin catching the glow of the holograms. Not just a place, a purpose. The Starks and your kind were once bonded through an alliance that shaped the foundation of what my people became. Our genetic structures were never meant to remain separate. That separation was forced. Ryan's hands clenched into fists as he considered the implication. Someone, human or Starks, had deliberately severed ties between the two species. He wasn't a historian, but he knew what that kind of erasure meant. Someone had decided humanity wasn't meant to know about its connection to the Starks, and they had done everything in their power to ensure the truth never resurfaced. His throat tightened as he turned back to the glowing records, scanning for some kind of explanation. Why hide it? He asked in a low voice. If we were allies, if we were supposed to be connected, why erase it all? Why pretend we were never here? Ain was silent for a long moment before stepping closer. It was easier to control us when we were separate, she said softly. Ryan frowned, glancing at her. Control, you say? She nodded, then gestured toward another set of projections that flared to life in response to her command. These records were different, less peaceful, more fractured. Ryan watched as wars played out in flickering light, battles waged between Stark's factions, between species, between ideologies that had splintered over time. There were those who believed our bond with humanity was a weakness, Ain continued in a measured tone with an edge of something colder. They argued that we deluded ourselves by sharing knowledge, by merging our genetics, by forging alliances that threatened the pure sovereignty of the Stark's empire. Ryan exhaled sharply. Let me guess, the ones who didn't agree ended up wiped out. Ain's gaze remained steady. History is written by those who survive, Ryan replied, shaking his head bitterly. He had witnessed enough power struggles, colonial expansion, and imperial greed to recognize what had happened. The Starks had purged their own history, erasing their connection to humanity to maintain control. And now, generations later, it was coming back to bite them. That's why you need me, he said, the realization settling in. It's not just about compatibility, you're trying to restore something that was taken. Ain's expression did not shift, yet Ryan could see the way her hands tightened. Our empire is fracturing, she said. The council clings to old traditions that no longer serve us. They believe in power through isolation, in purity of bloodline. But the truth is, we were never meant to be isolated. We thrived when we were together. Ryan exhaled, rubbing his face. This was bigger than he had imagined. He wasn't just some genetic match for a queen desperate to save her people, he was a missing piece of a puzzle that had been incomplete for centuries, and now, that puzzle was being put back together, whether the Starks wanted it or not. Glancing at Ain, he asked quietly, you think bonding with me is going to fix all of this? Her 6 emerald eyes searched his face for something he wasn't sure he even possessed. I think it is the first step, she replied, her voice measured and calm, and I think you know that too. Ryan let out a slow breath. He hated that she wasn't wrong. The next few hours passed in a blur of information, a history being rewritten before his eyes. Ain walked him through more of the archives, showing him evidence of things he could barely wrap his head around, maps of trade routes that had once linked Earth to Stark's worlds, ancient treaties written in languages both familiar and completely foreign, and records of human scientists working alongside alien counterparts centuries before humanity officially launched into deep space. Every piece of it chipped away at the foundation of what he thought he knew. By the time they left the archive chamber, Ryan's head was pounding. There was no time to process it all. As they stepped back into the main halls of the palace, 2 guards intercepted them. My queen, one said with a respectful bow before turning his gaze to Ryan, you are needed at the evening ceremony. Ryan frowned. Ceremony? Ain barely glanced at him before nodding to the guards. Understood, Ryan said, folding his arms. You're going to explain, or am I just supposed to go along with it? Ain finally looked at him, her expression unreadable. Tonight, The nobles will expect you to be presented as my chosen consort. If I do not formally acknowledge your presence, it will be seen as weakness. Ryan stiffened. So what, I'm supposed to perform for them? Ane's lips pressed into a thin line. You are expected to stand by my side and prove that you are more than an anomaly. Ryan huffed a quiet laugh. You really think they're going to buy that? She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. I think that if you fail, they will begin seeking other ways to remove you from the equation. Ryan's pulse quickened. He had been in dangerous situations before, but this was different. This wasn't merely about survival, it was about power, and he was standing in the middle of a battlefield he barely understood. Fine, he said, exhaling sharply, but I'm not dressing up in some ridiculous ceremonial robes. Ane gave him a slow, knowing look. We shall see.